Wine sat in her cabin, her hands clasped tightly together as an unfamiliar tension gripped her chest. Despite her growing resentment toward Jungkook, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The thought of him refusing to answer her calls only made it worse. Just then, the door opened and Henry strolled in, a sly grin on his face. Wine, you should really think about this marriage. Look at him, he doesn't even care about your reputation. His so called waiter job is more important than you. His words struck a nerve, and Wine's frustration boiled over. She slammed her hand on the desk. You're right, Henry. He's been ignoring me all day. And for what? Some useless job? The words spilled out before she could stop them. Her anger clouding her thoughts, but even as she spoke, an unsettling doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Why isn't he picking up my calls? Is he ignoring me? Before she could dwell on it further, her phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered. Hello, is this Mrs. Joan? Yes, who's this? I'm calling from ABC Hospital. There has been an accident involving a young boy. I found your number in his recent call records. Please come quickly. Wine's heart stopped. The anger, confusion, and frustration melted away, replaced by a surge of panic. I'm coming, she stammered, grabbing her bag and rushing out the door. Ignoring Henry's startled questions, her mind raced as she sped toward the hospital. An accident? What happened? Is he okay? Despite everything, she couldn't deny the growing dread in her chest. As she thought of Chongkook laying there, hurt and vulnerable, Wine rushed into the hospital, her heart pounding as she approached the reception desk. After hurriedly filling out the necessary forms, she was directed toward the operation theater. Standing outside, she felt the weight of the situation pressed down on her. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, her eyes fixated on the double doors. Finally, the doctor emerged, removing his gloves and mask. Goodness, he's safe now. Wine exhaled a sigh of relief, but the doctor's somber expression made her stomach twist. But what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated before speaking. He survived the accident, but the injuries to his spine are severe. I'm sorry, but he won't be able to walk again. He is disabled. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She felt a strange, inexplicable pain deep inside her. Before she could respond, the doctor excused himself, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. Moments later, Wine was allowed into the ward. She entered cautiously. Her eyes landing on Jungkook laying pale and unconscious on the bench, tubes and monitors surrounding him. She sat beside him, her fingers trembling as they rested on the edge of his bed. Henry stood nearby, arms crossed, rolling his eyes dramatically. Well, this is karma, isn't it? He deserves it for not valuing you. Why didn't respond? She barely heard him. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't understand. Why does this hurt so much? I hate him, don't I? She glanced at Jungkook's peaceful face and an ache bloomed in her chest. Despite everything, she couldn't bring herself to feel happy or vindicated. Leaning slightly forward, she spoke softly, her voice trembling. Chongkook, what have you done to me? Why do I feel like this? I was supposed to hate you. I do hate you, but then why? Why does it feel like my heart is breaking? And if in response, Jungkook's eyelids fluttered and his fingers twitched ever so slightly. One gasped, sitting upright. Jungkook, can you hear me? His eyes moved under his lids before slowly opening. His gaze weak but searching. He blinked a few times, his lips parting as though he wanted to speak. Henry scoffed from behind. Well, looks like he's awake. Let the drama continue. But Wine ignored him completely. Her focus entirely on Jungkook. As her heart raced, Jungkook blinked a few times, his voice weak as he spoke. His words surprising Wine. I don't know where your blue file went. I tried my best to find it, but I don't know how this happened. I am sorry. His brows furrowed slightly as guilt clouded his face. Wine's lips parted in shock, her heart twisting painfully. Even now, after everything, he's thinking about that. She leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. Jungkook, stop it. The file doesn't matter right now. Just rest, okay? Please. But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears as Jungkook's face crumpled, disappear, washing over him. Why? I made an accident. Why? I have lost everything. His voice was barely a whisper, but the pain in it was deafening. Wine squeezed his hand tighter, her own tears silently slipping down her cheeks. Don't say that. Jungkook, you're strong. You have faced so much already, and you can get through this too. I know you can. Jungkook turned his head away, his jaw tightening as he fought back tears of his own. You don't understand. You have always hated me. Why do you even care? His words stabbed at her heart, but she stayed silent. Not even sure of the answer herself, all she knew was that seeing him like this hurt far more than she expected. Henry, still standing in the corner, watched the exchange with a smirk, his arms crossed as he muttered under his breath. Such a touching scene, but let's not forget this is all his fault. One shot him a glare, her anger flaring for a moment before she turned back to Chongko, her focus solely on him. We will get through this, Jungkook, together. For the first time in a long while, she realized she truly meant it. Jungkook lay still for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. Then his lips parted and his voice came out low and strange. Wine, you should marry someone else. Wine's breath catch, her hand freezing mid-air as she reached for the blanket to adjust it. I can't stand beside you anymore, not like this. And anyway, you have never liked me. This shouldn't matter to you. His words were like shards of glass cutting her deeper than she expected. Her initial reaction was anger, her fists clenching as she fought the urge to lash out. But when she saw the raw vulnerability in his eyes, her anger melted into something softer. She let out a shaky breath, pulling her chair closer to the bed. Jungkook stopped saying nonsense. Her tone was calm, almost gentle, but there was a firmness to it that made him glance at her. You think I would just walk away because things got hard? Do you think so little of me? He averted his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. I'm just being realistic. Wine, you deserve someone who can give you everything. Someone who isn't. He trailed off, his voice breaking slightly. He leaned forward, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Stop it, Chongkook. You're not less of a person because of what happened. Do you hear me? Don't you dare think like that. Jungkook shook his head, his expression pained, but I can't give you the life you want. You will end up resenting me even more. Wine closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her emotions. When she opened them, her gaze was firm yet compassionate. Jungkook, if I wanted to leave, I would have done it by now. But I'm still here, are not I? So stop pushing me away. For the first time, Jungkook seemed at a loss for words. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of his fears and her unspoken emotions hanging between them. A year and a half had passed. Wine had taken care of Jungkook, adjusting her life around his needs. She had moved her office work to home, finding ways to balance her responsibilities while still being there for him. Every day she watched him struggle, and every day her heart ached in ways she couldn't explain. She had started to feel something for him, something more than the resentment and anger she once harbored. The line between hate and care had blurred, and now, as time passed, the feelings she couldn't push away were beginning to grow. Henry had long since figured out what was happening. He had watched Wine's shift in behavior, the subtle changes in how she looked at Jungkook, how she spoke to him with more tenderness than before. He had realized there was no way he would ever get a chance with her now, and so, without a word, he had quietly left her life. But Wine didn't mind, she didn't need him anymore. She was too focused on taking care of Jungkook and figuring out her own emotions to even think about Henry's departure. Jungkook, on the other hand, was still in disbelief. After everything that had happened, after the accident, the pain, the distance between them, he couldn't understand how this had happened. How could someone like Wine, who had once despised him, be so devoted? How had she become the person he relied on most? His thoughts were interrupted one day when the physiotherapist who had been helping with his exercises approached Wine with exciting news. I have heard about a doctor in Australia who specializes in cases like Chongok's. I'm almost certain he could help. It might be the breakthrough we have been waiting for. Wine's eyes lit up for the first time in months. Hope flooded her chest. Australia, her voice was almost breathless. Let's go tomorrow. We have to get there. Jungkook, who had been sitting in his wheelchair, looked at her with confusion and hesitation. Wine, do you really think this could work? She smiled, reaching out to take his hand, a look of determination in her eyes. I believe it will. This is your chance, Chongo. You have fought so hard already. We are not stopping now. The next day, they boarded a flight to Australia, the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air. Chugok's mind was racing, filled with both fear and excitement. Could this really work? Could he walk again? After several weeks of treatment, Jungkook was finally ready to take a step, a literal step, on his own. He had never thought this day would come. The moment had arrived. In the hub center, with Wine standing on one side of him and his exercise physiotherapist on the other, Jungkook was about to attempt his first steps since the accident. He gripped the walker in front of him, his hands trembling as he prepared himself. You can do this, Jungkook, I'm right here. Her voice was steady, but the worry in her eyes betrayed her. The physiotherapist gave him a reassuring note, guiding him gently as he lifted one foot then the another. For a moment, time seemed to stop. His legs wobbled but they moved. Jungkook's heart pounded in his chest. His eyes wide with disbelief. I'm standing, I am walking, with Wine beside him, and the physiotherapist's guidance. He took one slow step, then another. His legs shook, but he was doing it. He was walking. A tear slipped down Wine's cheek as she watched him. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment they had both been hoping for. She smiled softly, stepping closer to him, her heart full. See, I told you, you can do this. Jungkook looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. I can't believe it. How did this happen? His voice cracked with emotion. You hate me and yet you have been here all this time. Wine's heart skipped a beat at his words. She smiled softly, taking his hand. I don't hate you anymore, Chongkook. I never did. Not really. You just made it hard for me to admit it. Jungkook stared at her, his emotions raw. The past year had been a struggle, but as he stood on his own 2 feet, finally walking again, he realized that wine had been his strength. And for the first time in a long time, he believed in the future again. After a week, Jungkook sat on the sofa, his gaze fixed on wine as she worked on her laptop. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, her eyebrows slightly furrowed in concentration. He found himself studying the curve of her jaw. The way her lips pressed together in thought and the soft glow of her cheeks under the dim light of the room, he didn't even realize he was staring until Wine suddenly turned her head, catching his gaze. Her cheeks turned a lovely shade of red, and she quickly faked a cough. Breaking the moment, Jungkook blinked, coming back to reality. Clearing his throat, he spoke up, his voice hesitant but determined. Wine, I also want to do something. Can I go back to my old job as a waiter? Wine froze for a second, then snapped her laptop shut with a sharp click. Do not even think about it, Jungkook. I won't tolerate the idea that the richest CEO's husband would work as a waiter. No, not at all. Her voice was firm, leaving no room for argument. But Jungkook wasn't ready to back down. Then what am I supposed to do? I can't just sit around doing nothing. Why? It doesn't feel right. One slightly tilted her head as she thought for a moment, then her lips curved into a playful smile. Okay, fine, you can be my personal assistant. Jungkook's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Your personal assistant? How can I even do that? I don't know anything about. Before he could finish, Wine moved closer. To his shock, she climbed onto his lap, her arms wrapping around her neck. His breath hitched as she leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to the side of his neck. Why are you so scared, huh? I'm here with you. I will teach you everything you need to know. Her voice was gentle yet teasing, her confidence making his heart race. It's not that I'm scared, but wine pulled back slightly, her face inches from it. But what? Do you feel ashamed of being my assistant instead of a waiter? No, it's not that. He paused, searching for the right words. Good, because it's a much better job. Jungkook, I just don't want you doing something so beneath your worth. You are capable of so much more. Her tone softened, her eyes searching his. Jungkook felt his defenses crumble under her gaze. Alright, if it makes you happy, I'll do it. Wine's smile widened as she cupped his face. Leaning in to press her lips against his, it was soft, warm, and full of unspoken promises. Chungo kissed her back, his hands resting lightly on her waist. In that moment, all his doubts and insecurities seemed to fade away.